Hello, welcome. You're both late, so I'm deducting your pay.
I couldn't. I couldn't switch on my device.
Oh.
Yeah, I was charging it. My iPhone, my iPad that I do this on. I was charging it, and then when I went to switch it on, it wouldn't work, and then I had to turn it off and turn it on again, as you do. So it's all right now, thankfully.
Well, as long as it's working, we're all good.
So what was the device? Your pacemaker, Ronnie?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I was a bit worried then it wasn't working.
Yeah, well, we're gonna need it today because you're gonna be doing most of the talking, I would think.
It sounds like it, doesn't it? Yes.
Yes, they're definitely your stories today, and I think everyone's hoping that you've got at least one funny one.
Oh, I probably got several funny ones. I know I've got at least one that's really quite hilarious, I think, but we'll have to see how it goes down.
He says modestly.
Yes.
Now, I wanted to just give a shout out to Paul Watson before we started. Arrested yet again. I mean, he must have been arrested far more times than we have, Ronnie, I would think now.
I mean, probably, yes. And more recently as well. I mean, it's a long, long time since I was last arrested. But he was just arrested a couple of days ago in, where was he arrested? Was it Iceland or something like that? It's, I got the details somewhere about it all. And it was an international arrest warrant from Japan for when he was disrupting their whaling activities in Antarctica, apparently. It's a Greenland he was arrested. And it was for previous action he'd taken against a Japanese whaling fleet.
That's some serious authority, isn't it? I mean, just think about what you've just said, right? Yeah. So the warrants come from Japan.
From Japan, and
he was whaling in the Antarctic, and he was arrested in Greenland.
Yeah, the other side of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's some serious authority. You think about some of the horrendous people that do absolutely deplorable things, and they can't be extradited for whatever reason.
I know, but you try and save the whales, and that's it. And I mean,
I'm just thinking about the expense and the bureaucracy involved in something like that. I mean, that's so many people that have got to say, "Yep, that's fine."
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is, I don't know whether it's a situation now, but at one time in Japan, if you were arrested and charged with something, it would take ages before your case would be dealt with, and you could be, in prison awaiting trial for years, or the trial would go on for ages because it wouldn't be heard sort of continuously. Yeah. I don't know whether that's still the case, but you could be in for a very, really long time in prison.
Well, that's usually how they hold these people when they haven't actually got a whole bunch of evidence against them. They basically will get them on something really flimsy and hold them whilst they build a case against them.
Yeah, he thought there was some confusion because in the newspaper article I read, he thought that all of that had been dropped. All of this, kind of efforts to have him arrested for that. He thought it had all been dropped.
Yeah.
But obviously not.
Does this go back to 2014, that type of time?
Yeah, before. Yeah, quite some while ago. Quite some years ago. This is
ridiculous.
Yeah, because this is when Sea Shepherd were kind of veganizing.
Yeah. So but other than your shows, Roger, I don't know a whole bunch about Paul Watson, in fairness. But the one thing it has always kind of made me think about, especially more recently, I mean, I think when we first mentioned it last week or the week before, was that, and it potentially may well be the case for many others as well, it highlights within myself, at the very least, an element of sort of like internal speciesism that I haven't dealt with, in the sense that it's direct action that I've never really paid attention to because they're sea life, and it's always kind of like considered to be less significant when actually obviously that isn't the case. But it's just something that I noticed, that why haven't I been interested in this? Like, why have I never taken the time to read about this or care about this when I would if we were talking about land animals? I'd be all over that.
Did you never see that thing that was called Whale Wars?
Yeah, I did. I remember watching some of it on telly. In fact, even before I was vegan. But like, it was just something that I was thinking about after we were talking about it the other week, where when it comes to like marine life, in terms of what Sea Shepherd are doing, direct action and all those things, if this was like on land, I'd be all for that group 100%, because they'd be one of the very few ones that were doing something. Whereas, I've never really paid it attention, and I can only think that it's some sort of internalized speciesism that I've yet to deal with.
Because with a lot of people, the speciesism is the other way round, isn't it? There's lots of people concerned about whales and saving whales and dolphins who aren't concerned about, what happens to cows and chickens and...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the most popular bathroom designs is whales and dolphins. I remember reading, and it's like, well, it's a bit convenient considering how many are killed for tuna, for example.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, some years ago, I used to do all around the kind of, sort of West Midlands area where I live. I did several, probably 2 or 3 street stalls a week in different areas on the subject of whale and dolphin protection. And basically my kind of underlying motive was really to educate people to become vegan. But I wanted to sort of, to kind of display a popular issue that would attract a lot of people to the store, but at least cared about some animals.
Yeah.
And then when they came up to sign the petitions, I'd give them information, including information about veganism. And that was...
Yeah, Bernie would do that in Dublin about greyhounds,
Yeah. And I did that for quite a few years.
It's a form of animal use, of course, Ronnie.
What using the whales, the plight of the whales to...
Yeah.
I was always because I used to joke with Louise that if we kind of had a little bit of a falling out, I'd say, don't be nasty to me because, when I do the stall today, it might be the day of the big Norwegian, like a big Norwegian come, because one of the petitions was against Norway doing the whaling. And I had this fear that a big Norwegian had come to the stall and kind of, do me in.
Well, the karate guys, don't you?
I mean, a medium-sized one might have been enough.
A small one probably would. And one day I was doing the stall, and I looked up, and there was a great big tall, sort of blonde-headed bloke stood in front of me. And I looked up, and he said, "I am Norwegian." Oh my God, this is the day. But then he said, "But I totally agree with you, and I sign your petition."
Great.
So.
Well, here's a twist. When we were outside the Shelburne Greyhound Park one time, these guys were going in, and we were trying to encourage them not. And this guy said, "Well, look, I'm Norwegian, and I am actually part of the anti-whaling campaign." And so we said, "So why are you going in here?" And they said, "Well, I don't want to. It's my cousin's or somebody's kind of event, right?"
Yeah.
Because it's the usual thing. A lot of people didn't go to watch the racing; they went to the restaurants and the bars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think this is over here. It's harder in Ireland, of course, because the dog racing is subsidised by the government. But over here in the UK, or certainly in England, where we were really doing our campaigning. That was a big factor because it was easier to persuade people not to go because there's lots of places where people can go for a meal, isn't there?
Yeah.
And a night out, without contributing to dogs being killed.
Going back to Paul Watson, then I didn't ever meet him in person. The closest I got to Paul was through Dave McCall.
Was Paul not there when you did your Orkney thing then?
Oh no! That was a kind of a European Sea Shepherd operation.
Right,
and so Dave McCall was the kind of main guy there, the prime mover. And but I did look back. I've got a blog called "On Human Relations with Other Sentient Beings," and in 2015 I did kind of 2 little shows where Paul Watson was a regular on this quite a weird show. And it's called The State of Our Oceans. So he was a regular, and they brought me on because Watson had an argument with Gary Francione. there's a surprise. And so I was going to making my points. The funny thing is, one thing that you two might want to comment on is, in those days, I used to argue something that I don't think I would do anymore, because we were trying to move away from the argument at the time. I mean, this is not many years ago, but the prevailing argument amongst many animal advocates was go vegetarian first.
Yeah.
And Francione did a thing called the Vegan 123 or something. And we used to try to move it on by saying, don't say go vegetarian first. You say be as vegan as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that I like any of those now.
No, I was going to say I wouldn't be happy with that one either, to be honest.
No. I've just heard it. It's on the second of those clips things that I sent.
It just goes back to what we've talked about in the past, doesn't it? Like, all of us at some stage have said things that now, with hindsight, we'd look back and say, well, I wouldn't say that anymore. And that's kind of like progress.
Evolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not something we should look at and say, oh, I can't believe I used to get it wrong. Look at the fact that you've noticed that, acknowledged that, and changed it. Like, that's something to be proud of and, like, continue to do. We should always be open-minded about these changes and not, like, take it as criticism.
Yeah. So,
are
we ready for the main act?
What's the story that started Band of Beep?
Beep. Well, we'll have to say Band of Mercy, won't we? Although well, I mean, basically, I mean, what happened was I got involved with the Hunt Saboteurs in 1972, and I kind of caught the tail end of the hunting season because it was kind of started. It was in the spring when I started going sabbing, and I think the hunting season ends probably around about April, something like that. And so I caught the very tail end of it. I went out with the Northampton group because they were the nearest group to where I was, and then over the summer it was the otter hunting, so I went sabbing the otter hunts. And then at the start of the fox hunting season, which was would have been around about August of 72, they do this thing called cub hunting, which we spoke about on the last show, which is really impossible to sab, impossible to stop, using the normal hunt saboteurs methods. And so it was very frustrating kind of turning up with these things and standing there while these foxes were basically massacred and not being able to do anything about it. So that kind of got me thinking about, well, what can we do? What actually can we do about this? And then it went into the fox hunting sort of proper, and we were able to sab hunts the normal way. But I thought, well, before the next hunting season starts, which would have been round about August of 1973, we need to find a way of dealing with the cub hunting, and there were some other people that felt the same as me. There'd been a big intake of new members into the hunt sabs around about that time. It was when the kind of the idea of animal rights was gaining ground, and there'd been there were more people joining the hunt sabs, and there's like a few of them, new ones and sort of existing members kind of shared my views, and we ended up having a meeting. There was 6 of us had a meeting. It was in a basement cafe in London, and we're at this table in the sort of huddled around this table in the basement cafe, discussing what we're going to do. And I think I kind of suggested that we needed to go to the hunt kennels and cause damage to their vehicles to actually stop them from.
Yeah. So rather than sabbing the hunt, you want to stop them, yeah?
We'd stop them going out in the first place because it was impossible to sab them on a cub hunt. So that's what we decided we'd do. So right, we're going to do that. but we can't do it as hunt sabs because, obviously that's against the law. Causing damage to vehicles is against the law. And hunt sabs, do try to keep within the law, and it's a bit borderline at times, but they try to keep within the law. So we couldn't operate as hunt sabs. So we're thinking, what name can we use for our group? And I think I'd been reading I've been reading a book. I think it might have been called All Heaven in a Rage, which was the sort of history of the sort of animal protection movement. And in that book, it mentioned these groups called the Bands of Mercy, which were RSPCA youth groups way back in the 19th century when the RSPCA was formed. And like they were quite militant. They'd do things like damage guns that were going to be used for shooting and that kind of thing. And so we decided to adopt that name to revive the spirit of that group. And so we decided to call ourselves the Band of Mercy. And for 3 years, the Band of Mercy operated for 3 years under that name until the name was changed to the Animal Liberation Front in 1976. And the first actions we took as the Band of Mercy were actually at hunt kennels, where we go there and cause damage to their vehicles to stop them going out hunting the next day. I mean, they go out very early to do the cub hunting. They'd go out about 5 a.m. And so we would go to the kennels about 1 or 2 a.m. and damage their vehicles before they got up. And initially, we just did a small amount of damage. The idea was preventative damage. It was stuff like putting tacks in the ignition and putting tacks in the locks and stuff like that, and maybe letting down the tires and taking the valves away and stuff. That kind of thing. It was just minimum damage to prevent them going out the next day. I mean, obviously later on the thinking on damage with the ALF changed from that, but initially it was just
So that really was a kind of echo of the Bands of Mercy with an S, wasn't it? Because I'm looking at the on the Font of Knowledge Wikipedia. There is a whole page about the ALF, and there's one little section of that called the Band of Mercy, or the Band of Beep, as we're calling it. And but it says here, and this was terrorists or freedom fighters, the kind of Nocella Best book.
Yes.
There's a section called History, and the first essay there is by Noel Moyland. I don't know if you know him.
Noel Moyland. He was involved in was it a publication called Green Anarchist? He was involved in a trial called the Gandalf trial.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. I forget exactly what it was about. Some conspiracy trial to do with causing damage. Noel Moyland, I did know him at the time.
They were charged with turning white into a grey. So he's got a chapter in here called 30 Years of Direct Action, and the way that they report it in Wikipedia is said they revived. That's you. You revived the name of the 19th century RSPCA youth group, the Bands of Mercy, and for about half a dozen activists set up the Band of Mercy, which attacked hunt vehicles, slashing tyres, breaking windows, everything. But it seems that the youth group used to do that kind of stuff as well.
Well, yes, I mean that's why we, that's why we adopted the name, because obviously the RSPCA wouldn't do anything like that these days. And I don't know how long that action went on at the time before that it came to an end. But we wanted to revive the spirit of that, and I think, for want of a better name at the time, that's what we called ourselves.
Yeah, well, the only grace about that really is the fact that you got rid of it pretty quick. Before you move on to what you went on to, let's stick with the hunt saboteurs if we can for a minute, in the sense that it reports here that in 1974, the hunt saboteurs offered a reward for your capture. Is that right?
Yes. The hunt sabs were concerned, or certainly the hunt, the kind of hunt sabs.
I mean, do you think they meant it, or they just thought they had to do it?
Well, I think they were concerned that the finger was being pointed at the hunt sabs, because obviously this was action against. I mean, the Band of Mercy went on to carry action against other targets, not associated with hunting, but the initial actions were against hunting. And
the assumption was it's sabs that are making it up.
The hunt sabs were concerned that that it would be the finger would be pointed at them. Oh, this is just the hunt sabs, and that the sabs would be subject to police attention and all that because of it. And so they thought this would be a way of kind of distancing themselves from.
And is there any evidence for their fears? For example, was there an increase in negative press coverage, or was there an increase in police surveillance or anything like that?
I can't particularly remember. I can't remember that there was. I think that was just something they were worried about, because I think that I think all of us involved in the Band of Mercy were hunt sabs.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, were you still part of the committee of the HSA at the time in '74, and you had to vote on a proposal to offer 250 quid against yourself? Is
no,
that?
I think I was. I can't quite remember exactly what the situation was, because I had been on the committee, I think, at some stage, and I may have been on the committee then, but I certainly wasn't at the meeting where that decision was come to.
No, it's hard to imagine people like Dave Wetton going along with that, isn't it, Ronnie?
Well, I think he probably would have done, because he was certainly on the committee. So
it could have been a majority vote. It didn't have to be unanimous.
It could have been a majority vote. I mean, I can't remember. I know it was reversed. That actually decision was actually reversed at the subsequent meeting, which I did attend. I don't think I attended the meeting when it was actually.
And when you attended that second meeting, were you associated now with the Band of Mercy or not? Or
yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Well, you see, they strongly suspected that I was involved in the Band of Mercy. They didn't know for certain, but they strongly suspected I was, because of the type of person I was.
And your Band of Mercy sweatshirt and that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the badges and all the merchandise we had at the time, of course.
Yeah.
But they did reverse that decision at a meeting I kind of went to, and I think it was one of the. I think what happened was they held a meeting where not all the committee members were able to attend, and they made the decision. And the next committee meeting, where more committee members were able to attend, the decision got reversed because.
Yeah, they were trying to go for ratification, and it went the other way. Yeah, okay. Yeah. And the weird thing is by the time you got round to the middle of '74, the Band of Mercy would have moved away from hunting anyway. So it's almost like there wasn't really an issue at that stage, or is that wrong?
I think we still carried on. The raids at the hunt kennels, but it was just that we were doing. We started doing other stuff as well. The first action that didn't involve the hunt kennels was 2 attacks on an animal research laboratory that was being built in Milton Keynes, it was in one of the villages that was later to become part of Milton Keynes, really, where 2 of us tried to. We tried to burn this place down. We waited for all the kind of construction workers to leave, and we made 2 attempts to set fire to the place, and caused a lot of damage. I mean, it wasn't destroyed. There wasn't really enough in it to destroy it, because it was in the process of construction.
26,000 quid, it says here.
The total of the 2 attacks was 46,000.
Well, in 73, that'd have been a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so
Well, you've got to
money,
multiply that. To bring that to today's money, you've got to multiply it by 15, about 15. So it's 15 times 46,000, whatever.
About 600k.
Whatever. Yeah. It's quite.
That's a whole morning's work for some MPs.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
That's a few of the bungs that Keir Starmer's been given, isn't it?
Yeah.
A handful.
But
so just into a question. So obviously the Sabs didn't want the kind of legal repercussions, but I'm assuming they supported what you did.
I think some did and some didn't on the committee at the time. It was made up of people with varying views. I mean, obviously everyone was opposed to hunting and agreed with, the type of direct action that Sabs took. I wouldn't say that everyone on the committee at the time agreed with what we were doing, but I think the decision to offer the reward was really more to take the heat off the hunt Sabs.
Right. Yeah.
But when the decision was reversed, the kind of majority decision then, the majority view was that it was that it looked like a condemnation of what the Band of Mercy was doing, and that the hunt saboteurs didn't want to be seen to be doing that. Really, I think that's why the decision was reversed.
Okay, my last question that still links the Sabs with the Band of Mercy is when they had that second meeting, and it was this idea of the reward and all that was pulled down. There must have been a debate within the Sabs whether the Band of Mercy tactics were better than the Sab tactics, surely. Because if you can stop them going out for the day, well, bingo, isn't it?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, there weren't really any Sab tactics that worked against cub hunting, to be honest, because it just which was the reason why.
But why can't you use it against hunting in general then? Well, not just cub hunting.
Well, I think with hunting in general, that they felt that the methods they currently used kind of were effective, but it kind of. I think.
Yeah, that doesn't really make sense to me. Surely, if you've worked out that if you prevent the vehicles from leaving the kennels or wherever, that the hunt doesn't go out, then surely that's the most effective method you could come up with, regardless of how well you were doing on the field. You'd say, well, hang on a minute, you haven't even got to get them there.
And also, Andy, you said yesterday, last week, that a lot of hunts are close together. So that means you could stop a lot of hunts.
But if all you've got to do is go in the middle of the night and slash a load of tyres or whatever, you could hit 3 or 4 hunts in a night. Easy, yeah.
You could in theory. I'm not sure we ever did that. But
obviously it depends what location you're in, but potentially, with a bit of organisation you could. Because how long did you spend it? Like, I can't imagine you'd be there long, right? Because you don't want to get caught.
No, maybe 10, 15 minutes, something like that.
So think if you were well organised, how many you could do in like a 5-6 hour window overnight.
It's just the number of people that would be prepared to take part in that action, because of course it was illegal and
but from an efficiency point of view, you'd have thought the Sabs would be all for it, because it's taking the burden off them. The last thing they want to be doing is running across fields in a minority, getting beat up or run over with horses or any of these things. So you'd think that they'd be pushing that, because it stops the hunt ever going out. The risk of a fox being killed is 0 if they don't go out.
Oh, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that, there were mixed feelings. There were some that thought it was good. I think there were others that worried about, would this somehow affect the reputation of Sabs, like make them appear...
this is what baffles me. Obviously, we can't go back in time and change their minds, but you'd just be thinking, hang on a minute, hang on. If this works, right, what they're doing, and they stop the hunts from going out, it's not going to take too long for the hunts to go, you know what, this isn't worth it anymore, and we will no longer need hunt Sabs. So fuck your reputation. It's irrelevant if you stop hunting.
Oh, yes.
Those two things it just seems like so warped to me to think that way.
If you could get enough people involved in taking that sort of action, yes, I could see how that would work. It's just that, there are a lot of
but
people.
in reality, what would happen is, because later in the subsequent years they brought in stewards, they just hire security for overnight, wouldn't they? That's what they'd have done.
I think if that kind of thing became big, yes, that's what they do. Yeah. Yeah, and of course the advantage with doing it in terms of the cub hunting was because they kind of started so early in the morning. They wouldn't have had a lot of time to put right any damage caused.
Yeah.
Whereas with the ordinary fox hunting, because that started about 11 o'clock, didn't it? In the morning, it was much late, several hours later than the cub hunting. They'd have had more time to.
Well, it'd still be pushing it though, wouldn't it? If they've got to get a new set of tyres and all the rest of it, new locks and all that.
Oh, I mean, it would be. I mean, I remember one particular one where it was an actual ordinary hunt that we did. It wasn't cub hunting. It was, because sometimes we would do that. We would do it. We would take these actions during the ordinary hunting season. And I remember there one particular hunt kennels. I think there were 3 or 4 of us, and we went to the hunt kennels, and we pulled out the wagon, the hound van that they put the dogs in. What we did there, we pulled some wires. We got underneath and pulled some wires out. Disconnected some wires. You yanked them out on the electrics, and then we poured water in the fuel tank, and then I think we did something. I think there was a horse box there that we did something to as well, and then we went to the master of the hunt's home. And we did the same with his. We poured water in the fuel tank of his horse box.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you in terms of you do need the numbers of people to do this consistently. But think about it, especially in today's sort of things. How many times they'd want to replace these kind of, especially like destroying a fuel tank in a vehicle. You're not talking £100 or so. It's expensive to get these things fixed.
Yeah,
how many times, realistically, are they going to replace or fix or whatever without just saying, hang on a minute, this ain't worth it?
Well, I think what they would have done is as been said earlier, they'd have, they'd have had someone sat up all night on guard. Because it's not every night of the week before the hunt. It's only a couple of times a week, perhaps. But what I'm saying is, if we're just looking at how much potential, I don't know, setback you can cause them, it doesn't matter whether you smash the cars up on the Friday ready for the Saturday hunt. You could do it on the Tuesday because they've still got to pay the same amount of money to get it fixed, regardless of the time. Absolutely, you could do that. But you see, I think later on in the sort of history of the ALF, once the Band of Mercy become the Animal Liberation Front, we changed our thinking on damage. Yeah, we changed our thinking on damage.
Just now, obviously, like what that 40-odd K now being best part of $750,000, actually, that would be a significant hit to one of these hunts. So much so.
Yeah, that was on the laboratory that was being built.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, our thinking in the early days was really to do with prevention.
Yeah,
we could have done a lot more damage to the vehicles than we did. Our idea was to do the minimum damage to prevent them from actually going out hunting.
Mm-hmm.
See, so that's what we did. And so that was the kind of way we thought at the time. We weren't really thinking about costing the money. We were thinking about
to be fair, I can absolutely relate to that. There are a couple of puppy farm jobs that we did. So we would cut wires on cameras and we would cut wires on heat lamps, that kind of thing. We would limit what they were able to do, but we wouldn't just go around mercilessly smashing windows or kicking, because there was no point. Yeah. I understand.
That was the thinking at the time. So it was that was what it was about. And, obviously that particular action, I was talking about, what happened was we stood across the road at a bus stop from the hunt kennels, like watching what was going on, because it was just starting to kind of get light. We could see, and they were fiddling about for ages and managed to get these wires reattached on the hound van. And then as they were going up the drive with it, it just came to a halt, and they were fiddling about again for ages. And then we didn't know what happened after that. We hung about, and there didn't seem to be any movement for a while, for quite some while. And then we kind of, we left the scene. But apparently there was one of our a guy we knew was doing some undercover photography, and he went to the meat of the hunt. He went to the meat of this particular hunt, and he phoned me up later that day, and he said, "Do you know anything about what happened to this hunt? I think it was called the Essex hunt." He said, because they at the hunt meet, they're absolutely they were fuming. They were enraged, because what had happened is that the hound van broke down, obviously, and they called the hunt master, and he said, "Oh, no problem. I'll come over in my horse box and I'll pick up the hounds, and we'll do it that way." And of course, we'd gone to his home and done the same to his horse box, so he was very close to his home in the horse box, and that broke down. And for that reason, the hunt had to be called off, and all the supporters were there, and everyone was there, and the hounds didn't turn up. And they were cursing, the antis, the bloody antis, and wrecked the hunt and all that kind of thing. So it was good thinking to actually go and do the master's horse box. Otherwise, that would have been used to transport the hounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, obviously, the intel and the research that went into that too, finding out where he lived and making sure that you could do both places at the same time and all that sort of stuff, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, it's harder now. At the time, it was really easy to find out where these people lived. I think there was a book called Bailey's Hunting Directory. I don't know if it's still published. And it would give the home addresses of these characters in it. I don't know if it does
we've
now.
discussed that before, haven't we? We talk about like the issues of the vegan. I mean, these people's like full addresses.
Yeah.
Still listed in these things, and they've never been like redacted in any way, shape, or form. And obviously, like it's listed in like, I don't know, Kathleen Janaway's full address. I'm like, well, she's dead. So who lives there? Because it's not her, is it? But yet her address is fully listed. So, I mean, they probably should have done a better job of redacting some of this stuff.
Yes, yeah, but I mean, all of that's changed now. I mean, it used to be possible to go to, if say you wanted to find out who were the directors of, like say, an animal research laboratory. You go to a company's house, and I mean, back in the day, all the information was on sort of like microfiches, and you had to get it, had to kind of go through the filing system and get the particular microfiche and put it in the microfiche reader and look at it and all of that. And I think you could get a printout if you wanted from it. And you could get their home addresses, directors of these companies, you get their home addresses. But then because obviously, some of them are getting attention like from the ALF, the law was changed, and so they no longer had to put their home address. They could just put the company address instead.
Yeah.
And so that made it much more difficult to find out where these characters lived.
Hey, Ronnie, it looks like Bailey's stopped around about 2008.
Oh, right. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's anything to do, because obviously...
Yeah, I'm assuming the Data Protection Act would have smashed most of this to bits. Like that sort of thing just wouldn't be allowed anymore.
Possibly so. I mean, it became, it did become much more difficult to find out where these people lived.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, it has, but at the same time, with technology and the dark web and that kind of stuff,
You
at the
probably
same
could
time,
still. You probably could
if you've got the right tools or the right person, I suppose it's just as easy now. It's certainly easier in terms of like maps and organisation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you probably could still find out. If you put enough effort, it's just more difficult to do
I
so.
mean, the one thing that I obviously had a huge advantage of over like the stuff that I did versus the stuff that you did, and it was actually kind of like one of my main jobs, I suppose, as our little group, was the fact that I would use Google Maps like intricately and study every entrance, every tree. I'd get to know the layout of the land before I even visited the place, and obviously you just didn't have that ability. Whereas I could literally, put the little Google guy on the street and literally walk up and down as many times as I needed to get a layout of everything. Yeah.
Oh yes,
I mean, you can get a lot of details from OS maps, but not as much as
Google Maps just changed everything, especially down some of these country lanes when they started sending the little Google car like everywhere, and you can see every little alcove and you can see every little gap or gates that don't show up on road maps, all those kind of things. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, Google Maps sponsored by the Hunt Saboteurs.
It's definitely changed. It's definitely changed everything. Yeah. And obviously for people that would never get lost now either, it's so easy for them to find their way out with Google Maps and that kind of stuff. So it makes
absolutely, it's completely changed things. I mean, it's been bad for. I think the whole Google Maps thing has probably been bad for people's geography, because you just kind of, if you want to go,
it makes them lazy, I suppose. Well, I would say Google in general is bad for people's education in that sense, because it makes them lazy, and it's just the answer to every question is to type it in a box.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, don't knock it, man. That's how I found out about Bailey's directory. You know. They were talking about splitting between, because they used to have a hunt reports and also the directory. So they did toy with the idea of just having a kind of publicly available list of hunt reports rather than, you know, and then make the directory part of it secret or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ronnie, we've got about 12 minutes before 10. So do you want to move on away from the hunting now?
Yes. Basically we kind of, it was in one of the, the second attempt we made to kind of burn down this laboratory that's being built, we almost ended up being burnt ourselves because we miscalculated. We'd worked out how we would do it and how we would get out of the building that we'd set fire to, and we miscalculated, and we ended up having to run through the fire and smash the window and run down the fire escape. And
they built it by then.
Yeah, it was. Yes, yeah. And our trainers were actually on fire. We were running along with our trainers on fire. So we were quite,
Well, that's dedication for you.
Yeah. Yes.
That'd have made a good publicity clip.
Yeah, I was going to say, no, could have loved to have filmed that.
It would have been if someone had videoed it. So that was... But,
very good for evidence against you, though, in fairness.
Yes. I mean, one of the really significant actions we did was that was... The Band of Mercy's actions began in the, I would say, probably the sort of perhaps late July, early August of 73, when the cub hunting season began, and we carried out the raids on the hunt kennels. But then it was in November of 73 that we carried out the actions at the Animal Research Laboratory.
Yeah.
And then the next kind of significant action was really in June of 74, where there was two of us. We caused a lot of damage to two fishing boats that were due to be used in the killing of baby seals on the Wash up in Lincolnshire. And this was something where the hunt saboteurs had previously tried to stop this. What it was is it was like an extra source of income for these guys, these fishermen there, where they'd use the fishing boats as kind of motherships, and they'd launch inflatables and go onto the sandbanks and shoot the baby seals, the white coats, because they had white coats at the time, and then sell, obviously for the fur. And the hunt saboteurs, I think previous year the hunt saboteurs had gone out with inflatables of their own and tried to disrupt the killing of the seals, but with only limited success really. So we destroyed one boat and badly damaged the other. So it was called off. The killing of the seals was called off, and it never took place again. They had to get a license from the government to do it, because the seals are protected species. You have to get a license, and they were able to obtain a license. But after that year, they never got issued a license again.
It sounds weird, though, doesn't it? Oh, we've got a protected species here, and you have to get a license to kill them.
Well, it's the same with badgers. The badger cull. The slaughter of badgers.
Well, they're not very well protected then. If you can get a license,
they're not protected. No, they're not. All it means, they're not. It just means that you have to, go through this, extra process to be legally allowed to kill them, which you just get a license, and I don't suppose that can be that difficult. Really, it certainly hasn't been that difficult for years to do that. But that's what they did, and so it was a successful action in that sense, that it kind of stopped. And but the strange thing there, really, when you think of it, that it was the killing of the seals that prompted us to attack their fishing boats. But that's no worse than the killing of the fishes, is it? And yet, we never thought, oh, let's attack these fishing boats because they're used to kill fishes. Right. It was only when they were used in the process of killing seals that we attacked them. And that's the kind of speciesism as well, isn't it? Because
that's pretty much what, similar to what I was referring to earlier. Yeah, you just don't naturally think about these things because you're still within that cultural speciesism, which says, well, they're not as important as the seals or the whales. Yeah, absolutely. It's when we were when I was doing the clipping from the sea shepherd clips. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but I just remember suddenly thinking that and thinking, hang on a minute, this is something that I should have been really keen on. Just naturally, we're talking about direct action. We're talking about someone getting involved with documented evidence. You can see it. There's clips. Why have I never really been interested in this? And the only reason that I could come up with was that there is still some internalized speciesism where I don't consider sea life as important, and I want to work to change that.
But I think in general,
there is that reverse thing, though, isn't there? Like you said before, Ronnie. Like going back to Paul Watson, if he's been arrested for the 2014 thing, there was a guy called Pete Bethune, I think he was called. He was seen as like Watson's kind of understudy, as it were, and he got arrested in Japan as well. And then he said to the press on his way back that he was desperate to have a ribeye steak on the plane.
Right.
So I know. It's just, yeah. I know.
Yeah. So that's fiddling around, isn't it?
And of course, are the Japanese any worse than,
no, it's just xenophobia at the end of the day.
Yeah, they're killing. They're killing whales, and that they eat the whale flesh, or certainly some people in Japan eat the whale flesh and use the oil and all that. But how is that any different from over here?
It's not. In fact, some people would make the argument that theirs was quote unquote better because they use all of the animal, whereas foxes are just essentially not. So yeah, you could make an argument that in that case, but like it's all it is. It's just we're just talking about xenophobia. It's the same as when people come in and say, but what are you doing about halal meat? Well, the same thing that we're doing about all flesh. We're opposing it because it's a right violation. The only person that's specifically got a problem with halal is your racism, right? Like that's the issue.
Yeah, I think often people that say that kind of thing are racist.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why they have a problem with halal, but they don't have a problem with what happens to other animals. It's not actually a problem with what happens to the animals in any way.
It's a damn foreigner
internal racism issue. Yeah, exactly.
There's a thing in this report about the Band of Mercy, Ronnie, and I don't think I've ever heard you talk about it. I'm not sure. It's saying that that fire you just talked about was the first known act of arson in the movement. But then they're also saying that you did some actions against gun shops and chicken breeders. Is that right?
Yes.
Gun shops?
Yeah, we
gun shops.
Yeah, we did. Well, chicken breeders. Well, yes. The
like a hatchery, I suppose.
Yeah, no. I'm just trying to think of the kind of was it the Band of Mercy? Was it? Yes, I think it was. What it was is the what we did. Myself and another guy, because I can name him because we were later convicted. Guy called Goodman. What we did, following the attack on the SEAL boats, which I didn't do with Cliff. I did those with another guy. But Cliff and I, what we did was we embarked on a camping holiday. You see, we had a kind of hit list of places, and what it was someone sent us, someone who was in the kind of scientific community but not involved in animal experiments, and who was actually opposed to animal experiments. The company that he worked for, because they produced scientific instruments, they were sent a list of all the places that bred animals for experiments. So we had this list, the Laboratory Animal Breeders Association handbook or something it was called. It was and all these places were listed. So we had a hit list of places that bred animals for experiments, and they were easier targets than the laboratories because, of course, security on places was much less than it is now because it was much more expensive. It's in the digital age. It's much more. It's just cheaper to have, all the cameras and alarms that everything are cheaper now. But in those days it's more expensive. And then the only places that had any real security were really the laboratories. The laboratories had more security really because there was expensive equipment in there. And so they, sometimes there'd even be a security guard there, but they'd have alarms and they'd have cameras and things. But the breeding places didn't. The most security they'd have would be like a lock on the door, really. That would be it. So they were easy targets, and at the time we were mainly targeting their vehicles anyway. So what we did was we were camping near to one of these places. Often we'd camp in a field or at the side of the road, and we'd go and suss out the place in the daytime and then have a few hours sleep and then kind of, pull up the tent in the middle of the night and go to the place, do the raid, and then kind of go to the next place and set up camp there and do it like that. And the gun shop was, while we were en route to to do one of these places, we noticed the gun shop. It was actually in Marlborough, down in West Marlborough, is that in Wiltshire, I think it is. And it was this gun shop, and we thought, on the way back, let's have a go at the gun shop. But it was one of these places. It was quite an old-fashioned place, and instead of having big windows, it had lots of small windows. So we assembled about a dozen half bricks, and we kind of, we stopped in a side street near this place, walked to this gun shop. It was in the middle of the night, and we were seemingly ages outside, throwing bricks through all these windows that the place had.
Well, they got the idea for Bullseye on the telly.
Yeah. And so that was the gun shop. And the chicken breeders place. It was a place. I think it was near London. It might have been in Buckinghamshire or something like that. Where what they were doing, they were breeding chicks. Baby chicks to send to laboratories for experiments. And what we did was we would always look for a vehicle, but they didn't have a vehicle there at the time. So what we did was we got all the packing cases that they'd send the chicks. Often they would go on the train and there'd be all these packing cases. We got all the packing cases, and we spent, I think, a couple of hours moving these packing cases to the middle of the next field, and we made a big pile of them and set fire to them all, burnt all these packing cases, and that was the raid on the
and that's where they got the idea of the Wicker Man from.
Possibly so, yeah.
Well, it seems, according to this report, the last thing you did was what ended up you being called the Bicester. Is it Bicester? Bicester 2?
It's Bicester 2.
Oh, Bicester.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay. And apparently you performed the movement's first hunger strike, Ronnie.
Yes, what happened was, and this was sometime later, because what happened was when we were arrested, we were actually arrested. It's very interesting because the place we were arrested was called OLAC, Oxford Laboratory Animal Colonies, and it was they bred kind of small animals, I think, like rats and mice. For laboratories, and we parked our car on a housing estate about a mile away and walked across the fields and got in the back of this place, and we were kind of looking round to see what we could do, and Cliff crept up to the front and then came back and he said, "There's a security guard in the building at the front, but I don't think he's seen us. I don't think he's seen us." So we said, all right, we'll stay at the back and see what we can do at the back. And the next minute, the place was surrounded by two sorts of police, by ordinary police and by military police, because it was near, I think it was near an air base, like an RAF air base. And strangely enough, the air base is the place where the vegan campout is now held.
Oh,
I think that vegan campout is happening. It's now some.
That's right.
Heritage.
That's absolutely right. Bicester Heritage, whatever. Yeah.
It's now like, I think it's some kind of heritage motoring museum typey place, but it was an airbase, and so there were military police there and your ordinary police because it was near the air. This place was near the airbase. And the police, and we hid under a building. They had buildings there that kind of sort of lift the ground on kind of stilts because the ground was even. It kind of, they're up off the ground, and we hid under one of these buildings, but they found us. And ironically, they used tracker dogs to find our car, and there was loads of evidence in the car because we didn't think the car would be found. You see, so that was rather ironic, really. And we were on remand. We were put in Oxford prison for about 10 days on remand. Then we got bail. But the hunger strike came the next year after I was sentenced, because we were on bail until the following March of 75, and that's when we each were sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at Oxford Crown Court. And it was after that I went on hunger strike to get vegan, a diet suitable for vegans.
And what happened there? I mean, like, was that at that time? Could you declare yourself a vegetarian, or wasn't even that?
Yeah, what happened? What happened was when I it didn't matter really when I was on remand. It didn't really matter because you could have food brought into you, and I was having friends bring in food, so I didn't have to rely on the prison food. But when I was, when you're convicted, that you can't do that, and so you kind of go in at reception, and they said, "Oh, any dietary requirements?" And I said, "I'm vegan," and they said, "Well, what's that? We don't know what that is." And I explained, and they said, "Well, we don't recognise that. You'll just have to have the vegetarian diet and just eat what you can out of the vegetarian diet." See, and I said, "Well, that's not good enough. I'm not going to get, proper nutrition from doing that." And I went on a hunger strike. So I kind of went without food to get food, really, which is kind of rather strange.
So, I mean, did that get press coverage and all that malarkey?
I think it did get some press coverage at the time, and my MP got involved because I was living in Luton at the time, and there was my MP was quite sympathetic, and I think he kind of got involved and kind of put pressure on the authorities as well. And after about 10 days, they agreed to give me a vegan friendly diet, and I sort of kind of sat down with the prison officer who was in charge of the kitchen to kind of work out a diet that would be suitable. I mean, it was all, it wasn't anything expensive, but it was adequate.
I thought you were going to say you sat down with the kitchen people to eat it. Okay, so actually, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but just very briefly, with the Just Oil people who have been convicted recently.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of fuss. The fact that the same judge has given people who committed serious sexual offences less than them, right? And that was the same with you. When you got your 10 years, I remember an MP stood up in the Commons because some people who were convicted of grape got less than you.
Yeah.
Well, the same judge that sentenced us.
Just to recap for everyone, because there's a few people that missed it, Ronnie. What did you potentially go to jail for, and what year was this?
Well, what it was
just for being Ronnie Lee.
That was enough. Yeah, that's bad enough. It was. We were arrested in. I think it was August of 1974. And then our court hearing at Oxford Crown Court was in March of 1975. And we each got 3 years. And it was on quite a number of charges of either arson or criminal damage at various places. And we each got, we were each given 3 years. But there's actually a funny story that I kind of promised both of you I'd tell you a funny story.
That's one of my questions. You've already covered one of my questions.
Involving shit. Yeah. What it was we went to while we were on the kind of one of these holidays. I think it was because we did 2 of these camping holidays. It was on the second of the camping holidays that we got arrested. But the first one that we did in the June, one of the places we went to was a place in Worcestershire. It was called near Malvern. It's called Perrycroft Lodge. Well, it was called Perrycroft Lodge, and they bred beagles there for laboratories, centre laboratories. And so normally we would try and get in round the back of the place, and we kind of sussed the place out, and there was really no way in round the back. It was just all people's houses and people's gardens and all that. It wasn't like going across fields. So we thought we're just going to have to go down the main entrance, And so we went down the main entrance, and to do that you have to go past the guy's house, the guy that owned the place, and our idea was to damage a vehicle. They normally have some kind of van that they used to transport the dogs. So we crept past the guy's house, and Cliff was in front of me, leading the way, and we went down to where the kennels were. We were looking round to try and find a vehicle. Then suddenly all the dogs started barking, making a hell of a row. They obviously heard us. And the guy came out the house and started shouting, and he wasn't shouting, he was shouting to the dogs to shut up. And we thought, shit, what if he comes down? We're going to have to hide. And Cliff said, well, follow me. We'll have to hide. So I was following Cliff. And then the next minute there was a big splash and he disappeared. I thought, what's happened to him? And what had happened was he'd fallen in the cesspit. There was a cesspit where all the dog shit, and he fell in the cesspit, and he climbed out, and he was covered in shit. He was coughing and sputtering.
Oh yeah, I mean it's not just the fact that obviously it's disgusting. That's the dogs were barking. As well.
The guy was, because I would imagine the dogs, would bark on occasion. Because say if a fox was down in the area or a badger or something, they'd bark, wouldn't they? Yeah. It probably wasn't that unusual, for that. And the guy was shouting. We thought, well, we can't go back the way we came because the guy's...
You should have started barking as well, Ronnie.
We should have done, yeah. So anyway, what we had to do was we had to go across people's gardens, in the gardens of the people that lived at the back. We had to go across their gardens. We had to climb over someone's shed. So I was thinking there must be this like trail of shit, all across the gardens and all over this person's shed where Cliff had to. And then we got back to the car, and he basically had to strip down to his underpants, and I think I think he put his trousers and that over the engine of the car to dry them out, which was so it was everything was smelling of shit. It was just terrible. And we drove to a campsite, and in my campsite, and just drove in there. It was the middle of the night, and he went in the showers and had a shower and washed all his clothes. I mean, luckily, he had spare clothes. We had spare clothes with us, So.
That was like carry on camping. Just to clarify,
I mean, so it's kind of a bit like Dad's, like a Dad's army version of things, at times.
Yeah. Just to clarify, Ronnie. So this almost life-threatening or at least life-altering experience for Cliff. That's your funny story, is it?
Yeah, that's the shit story. Yeah,
that's his shit story. Yeah. He did advertise it as a shit story.
It was a shit story,
but it's certainly a shit experience anyway.
Yeah, shit experience.
But my genuine question was, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you say that the Band of Mercy were only ever sort of responsible for one liberation, which was those guinea pigs?
Yes.
So I wanted to know essentially where did the transition come from criminal damage, so to speak, to not only we're going to start removing more animals, but that's going to be like the focus of the name and everything that we do.
In a sense, the rescue of the guinea pigs, it wasn't planned. I mean, once again, I think that might have been during our first kind of camping holiday, and there was this place. It was near Salisbury in Wiltshire. And,
right next to the army. You've not had enough with the.
We seem to be going near these bases and that. No wonder that we had the military police come in the end. What it was, there was this place. Once again, it was in this directory of Laboratory Animal Breeders Association, we'd gone in the day to suss it out, and we saw that they had there was a vehicle there, and we thought, right, a van. They usually had these kind of white vans that they use. We thought, right, that's our target. We'll come in the middle of the night and we'll damage that van. Anyway, we did the usual thing, camping nearby and all that. But when we got there in the early hours of the morning, the van was gone. I think the person who drove it probably took it home. And so we thought, what the hell are we going to do? So anyway, we tried a door, one of the doors into this place, and it was open. We went in there, and there was all these kind of baby guinea pigs in cages. So we grabbed like half a dozen of them, and we got in our car, and although it was June, I think it was quite a chilly night. So we thought we were a bit worried about these guinea pigs being cold. So we put them up our jumpers, which was lucky because we were stopped by the police. What we'd done was arranged with John Bryant, who we spoke about on a previous show. He's a guy that wrote Fetid Kingdoms and all that. He lived quite nearby, so we phoned him up and said, "Look, we've rescued these guinea pigs. Can we bring them round to yours?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, yeah, bring them round. I'll look after them." You see, so we were on our way to John's, which was probably only about 10 miles away, and we got stopped by the police. It was back 2:00 in the morning, and they said, "What you're doing out this time of night? There's been a spate of burglaries in the area, house burglaries, and what you." And we said, "Oh, we're on a camping holiday, and our car broke down, so we've been delayed and everything." And they looked in the boot of the car, and there was, obviously our camping equipment was in there, so they kind of believed us. But thankfully, they didn't search us because we had guinea pigs up our jumpers.
Well, they might just thought you're a bit strange.
Yeah, and thankfully the guinea pigs kept quiet, and they're only little, so the police didn't see them, and then we were able to. And John, looked after these guinea pigs for the rest of their lives. The small guinea pigs. Yeah. So,
which, if they started squeaking, you'd have to pretend it was you, wouldn't you?
You'd have to kind of pretend that you kind of had flatulence or something, I suppose. It would make a squeaking noise. So, but that wasn't planned. You see, it wasn't a planned rescue. We just did that because.
Yeah, but what Andy's getting at is that there was a policy shift when they became planned.
Yes. What happened was because you see,
because obviously, I mean, just to go back to the naming thing. Obviously, there's a big shift from we're going out to cause damage specifically quite often to vehicles to actually removing animals and making that kind of the focus point of what we're going to do.
What actually happened, that there were only 6 people involved in the Band of Mercy. We didn't ever recruit anyone else, and you know, those 6 people never did anything altogether. Normally, I think the most people that ever went on a Band of Mercy raid were 3. You know, because not everyone's available. You know,
I understand,
people lived in different parts of the country.
Different parts of the country, yeah. It's pretty much
Yeah.
the same as the group that I was part in. I mean, we were 8 strong, and I never met 2 of them. So
yeah. You see, so basically, we didn't really have the numbers to kind of do animal, and you know, doing small amounts of damage was probably the most we were really capable of doing with the numbers. But then what happened was, I mean, Cliff and I were sent to prison, and we were in prison for a year. We got early release because it was our first offence and everything. So we got what they call parole. We got released after a year, and I was kind of, I sort of thought, well, maybe that's the end of it. You know, no one else is going to want to do this kind of thing because they'll have seen we got sent to prison and people won't want that. But I was amazed at how many people were coming up to me. You know, these were young people involved in the Hunt Sabs, because I got involved in the Hunt Sabs again, and they were all coming up to me and say, "We want to do that. How can we do it? We want to do that kind of action." You see, and there was like a real influx of activists, and the name was changed to the Animal Liberation Front in June of 76.
Yeah, but you're still not answering the thing about how did it come that people started to focus on the rescue instead of the damage?
Because we had more people, because we had more activists, and so because there were more activists, it became.
So it was just practicalities then.
Just practicality, because the first ever raid that was done under the name of the ALF was the rescue of beagles from our research facility down in Kent.
You see that, Andy? That last question of yours 20 minutes ago can be boiled down to it was practicalities.
We got some more law. We got some more nuance. It's good.
Yeah, it was increased numbers really, because you need more people to rescue.
Yeah, no, that makes sense in lots of ways. So the intention was kind of always there, but it was almost like, well, how are we going to do that? Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Well, I don't know whether I don't know so much whether the intention was kind of even there in the early days, because it kind of started off as a sabotage thing, you know, preventative, doing damage as a preventative measure. That was what it was all about. It wasn't really about animal rescue. And it kind of just progressed because I think that the kind of, you know, a lot of the new people kind of, the people that took part in the raid where the beagles were rescued, I think that those were all new people. They weren't people that were in the original 6. I mean, I didn't take part in that myself, and so, you know, with new people, you get kind of new thinking, and
that makes sense.
Yeah.
New ideas coming in.
Here's a question. This might sound a bit out of left field for you, Ronnie, but I'm not sure. Did the birth? I mean, we've got ALF 76, then you got Animal Aid 77. So did the fact that there was this big kind of push towards leafleting and education and everything change things? That people thought that the direct action could support that or slot in there somewhere. I mean, does that? You know, did that kind of figure as you remember?
I think we kind of, not really. I don't think so. No, I don't think it did.
Well, obviously it did, but by the time we get to the BUAV radicalisation, it did, because they were able to be essentially the kind of first press office of the LF before you started doing it, didn't they?
They kind of were, but you see, I think as far as I was concerned personally, I was, although I wasn't opposed to animal rescue, and I took part in animal rescue myself, I was much more into the damage. I saw the damage as the way of really harming these industries. And basically what happened was, you know, the idea of doing the minimum amount of damage to stop them doing whatever they were doing changed.
To do the maximum amount.
Then we kind of developed the concept of economic sabotage. In other words, that you cause as much damage as you can to put these people out of business, to cost them, to make them lose money. You see, so the thinking behind the damage changed, and there was a bit of a kind of there was a little bit of a conflict between people that were kind of into that, and other people that were more into the animal rescue.
But the autonomous nature of it must have solved that, in the sense that people who agreed would go get together, I suppose, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's what happened. But what what would frustrate me would be that, I mean, the rescuing of the animals was always a much more complicated operation. You needed more people, you needed more planning. You kind of had to find someone for the animals to go. You'd kind of often have to hire a vehicle, like a van, to take them away. Take the animals away if they were large, especially with the larger animals, maybe like. Yeah,
I think we should do a show about this, or a segment of the show, because the idea of rescuing animals is a romantic thing that people they love that, and even the press loved that, and initially the national groups loved that, but when activists started turning up at sanctuaries with double the amount that they were expecting and stuff, then that's where the kind of problems started.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The practicalities of these are very difficult. I mean, it's wonderful to imagine the idea of us getting a group of people together where we could go and liberate, say, 5,000 hens. But where are they going? Because no sanctuary alone can camp with that amount. So you're going to have to spread them out between various ones. And then that's all of those sanctuaries full that can't take any of their usual birds in because they've taken yours. And who's paying for them?
Yeah, you see, we always used to kind of agree with the sanctuaries and whoever was, we'd work out beforehand how many we'd be able to take. And we used to normally stick to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done anything potentially where the job was so big that we had to leave some behind. But I can imagine the realities of that.
Yeah, we did have to leave.
Yeah. Just out of sheer numbers. I mean, luckily for me, I was never involved in any kind of group liberation where, even if it wasn't a second trip, everyone was saved. But yeah, the idea of, say, going into a battery farm, for example, and just taking X amount and leaving all the others behind.
Yeah, we often did that.
Yeah,
and when we rescued those, half a dozen guinea pigs, there was loads left behind.
Yeah, of course, and it comes down to who do you take? The one's easiest to collect, essentially. The one.
You feel as though you're playing God.
Yeah, you do. Absolutely. It's horrible. I mean, I've talked to you about this before privately. I hate when I'm doing a film edit, for example, and I have to cut certain bits of footage away as if, this bit's not good enough. And although it's obviously,
I think there's a big question mark over certain rescues, though, in that although you're saving those individual animals that you take, it's like, for instance, that say we took those half dozen guinea pigs, and it was great for those guinea pigs, because that didn't affect the demand for guinea pigs to be used for experiments. Then what would have happened is another half dozen guinea pigs would have just replaced those ones. You see, so we rescued those, but it meant that another half dozen would have taken their place. So you're not really, in the scheme of things, you're not really kind of making any difference.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose on the other side of that as well is, and I know this from experience from my time volunteering at the sanctuary, where especially these people that have been doing it for a long time, they can't say no. So even if they're already at full capacity, if one of these activists turns up with 10 lambs or 50 hens or whoever it is, they'll always say yes. And obviously that's detrimental in some way to all the animals that are already in the sanctuary, because there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many pounds in the bank.
Yeah, there's like a structural problem, because the activists...
And I'm sure you know this with like people like Declan, for example. It's very hard when they're put in this situation when activists turn up at the gate or ring them up and say, hey, I've got this amount of animals, for them to say, I can't do it.
So I think at the end of the day, you're not really...
It's an emotional blackmail for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen
and I think I think the other thing is that you're kind of really, you're not really tackling the root of the problem.
No, and I mean, I'm sure you've both seen this as well. One of the things that used to frustrate me a lot, especially during springtime, was there was a number of activists in the Midlands, I won't name them, that would do the same thing every spring. They would go to a particular farm and they would pay for X amount of baby lambs and they would bring them to the sanctuary. And it's like, well, what's the benefit here? The farmer's now got a second stream of income that comes from
there's a problem.
Knowing full well that all he's got to do is ring you up or take a photo and you're going to run over there. And it's the sanctuary that now carry this burden because these activists will drop the animals off and they might come once more, but they never come again, forgetting that these lambs need to be fed multiple times a day, every few hours by someone. And it's, I think all of that stuff gets forgotten. Like I said, it is very much romanticised with the idea of like, you see it on Facebook sometimes with like dogs in kennels in back gardens and you'll get 1,000 screaming people going, go and get them out. And it's like, hang on a minute. Even if that was that simple, where's the dog going? Who's their rescue backup? Who's making sure that their life is going to be better in the future? Not just a case of moving them from one hellhole to another. All of these things nobody thinks about. They just think about the idea of opening a door.
I think the thing is, I think that it's one of these things where, something looks good, like, at first sight or when looked at in a very kind of surface way.
Yeah, and I think without being rude, a lot of it just comes to a lack of actual sort of boots on the ground experience. The people that usually naively think that way have never done it. And the people that have kind of understand that it's not that simple.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I think when animals were rescued, that it could generate it. It did generate some positive publicity and would raise awareness, because you'd get positive publicity for that.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you a story from a few years ago that people can Google if they want. It's a place in Dorset, or actually I think it comes into Somerset. But yeah, it was Adam Bailey Rescues and Rehomes, a sanctuary that I emptied 4 years ago, about a week-ish. So it'd be 4 years and about a week. And the press were quite happy with what we did and were quite supportive. And yet I faced charges for 10 months before the case was dropped. So the public and the press were quite supportive of the liberation for the right reasons, but yet still supported the police investigating me because they felt like that was the right thing to do too. It was a real conflict between everybody.
Yes. Yeah. But you see, I think that, the only time when you kind of could say definite, like, we've saved these animals and no other animals will replace them, would be, say, if we took hens from a battery unit, because what they do there, they don't, if you take hens out of one of those places, they don't replace them.
Well, sometimes they don't even notice, do they?
They don't even know. What they do is they, all those animals get cleared out all at once.
Yeah, it's a batch thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So
yeah, and I mean, especially places like that too. I can't remember what the percentage is off the top of my head, but it's something like 18% roughly are expected to die.
Oh yes.
They're not. If there's 10,000 to begin with, they don't expect there to be 10,000 at the end.
We would see quite a lot of dead ones in there.
Yeah, it happens. So I'm sure it's something like as high as 18% or so are expected to die.
Yeah, it is quite a high number. There is, although it sounds romantic, there are problems associated with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just in terms of, probably the easiest example to give to people of just how complicated it is. If you were to liberate one calf, for example, like I have in the past, that calf probably needs to move 3 or 4 times with paperwork each time so that they can get lost within the system so that DEFRA don't do anything. Because potentially the danger that you run with animals that are classed as farm animals, especially animals that once upon a time have been linked with diseases, is you have to make sure that there's a paper trail that follows them the whole way around.
It wasn't the case for the ALF in the early days.
Yeah, so. Of course. Whereas now, for example, how they kind of get away with it is they will find a calf of a similar age and similar markings because they're not photographs. It's kind of like a piece of paper that's got like a blank cow and you draw the patches and things. So you can kind of find matching ones and use replicas like that. But it's really complicated for one calf, just one. And expensive.
Something...
So like you think of the romantic idea of just turning up to a dairy farm and liberating 50 calves. It's just not, it's not practically possible.
That's a very difficult thing. We can finish off with this one, which is really interesting, I think, given what you both said. You did a couple of videos recently, Andy, where you were talking about, the thing about, well, if it focuses on cruelty, you've got to evidence it and show it and all that kind of stuff. That's one thing about, you were saying, Ronnie, about the ALF used to get some good publicity because obviously, somebody in a mask holding a beagle, who doesn't like that? But I think one interesting thing there is that I don't think that the ALF and the press was about the conditions. It was just about, well, they were in there and now we've taken them out. Right. And so it wasn't based on the conditions, I don't think. It was based on the fact that they'd been liberated from a terrible, oppressive situation. And not because of the conditions, because they were just in there. Is that right, you think?
Yes, I think that's, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, obviously, there'd be different situations, like the kind of, that if we rescued, say, animals were due to be supplied to laboratories, they were being rescued really from a fate that awaited them rather than from the conditions they were being kept in. Although, quite often those conditions, were pretty terrible anyway. Obviously, hens.
Yeah, but it was pre-experiment, wasn't it?
It was you're rescuing them from, and hens rescued from a battery farm. Obviously, they're rescued from terrible conditions, but their lives are also saved because, of course, they end up being killed. They're killed at about 18 months old. So you're saving them from, from an early death as well. I think that's true. It was kind of, I think there was there was a kind of more.
You see, I don't remember the ALF press being about, we've rescued these individuals from cruelty. It was more, we've taken them out of a place of oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a little kind of story I can give you that kind of summarises that really well. So one of the biggest dog rescues that I ever did, a puppy farm somewhere else in Wales, nowhere near that dairy farm, just coincidental. But a lot of the kind of criticism we got from people was a lot of these dogs were not filthy. They didn't come out of dirty kennels. They were just being bred. So like in the past, obviously, some of these really horrible puppy mills, the dogs were kept in filth. And you could take photographs and that would be evidenced. Whereas a lot of the public were saying, well, what's wrong with these dogs? Well, they're being bred for profit. Well, they didn't see that as the issue because they were clean and well looked after. So the use factor, they didn't see it. They were looking for cruelty. They were looking for abuse and they couldn't see, they didn't think about any mental trauma or any of that sort of stuff. They just couldn't see any physical dirt and therefore they couldn't see a problem and actually criticised us for removing the dogs. Because they'd been kind of, conditioned forever to only look for cruelty in these cases. You remove an animal from a situation because it's cruel, not because it's wrong. So, I always find that kind of interesting now. Because at the time I didn't really think about it like that, but that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, we're back to the speculation, haven't we, that the groups that do these inspections have probably found some fairly reasonable conditions and probably just moved on. As it were, and yet the reason to liberate those is just as strong as anyone else.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, I mean all these animals are going to end up being killed, aren't they? At a fraction of their, natural lifespan.
Well, they're all having their rights violated, whatever.
Well, yes, I mean obviously they're being exploited and confined, and all these things are going on as well. And that, that's the fundamental wrong, and anything else is on top of that, isn't it? Any poor conditions come on top of that.
We're always back to the fundamental wrong. And the solution, of course. What's the solution to the fundamental wrong, Ronnie?
Well, the solution is vegan education, because you've got to look at, why do these things occur in the first place? Why do we have animal experimentation and the laboratories and the places that supply the animals to the laboratories? Why do we have, broiler farms? Why do we have battery farms? The fundamental reason for that is speciesism, isn't it? Human supremacism. The fact that humans think they can, use other animals for themselves, for their own benefit.
No, you're totally out of date there, Ronnie. It's not having mercy and carnism.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that stopped him dead there, didn't it, Andy? That did.
I mean, mercy. Well, you see, so that is a problem. It is a problem that there's so much emphasis on cruelty, but I don't necessarily think that's a new thing. I think, way back in the day, when we were campaigning against animal experimentation and campaigning against hunting, we very frequently talked about cruelty.
It's the very frequently is not the problem. It's the fact if it's exclusively that's the problem.
Yeah, yes, I also think that the difference also when you're going back to then is a lot of people's idea of that word was stronger than what it is now. Over the last 20, 30 years or so, that idea of cruelty for most people has been prevented in their heads at least by certain groups and organisations. So there's like a divide between those things, whereas I don't think going back to like the 50s and 60s and stuff, you could have denied it. Whereas now we do have all these ridiculous marketing campaigns and cartoons that sell burgers to kids and all sorts of stuff that's completely changed everyone's minds about things. And they do definitely have a disconnection from what actually happens and what they think happens. So I think people's understanding of that word has changed. You may well have been using it just as frequently back then, but the people around you would have understood it differently than what they do now.
Well, I think we'd have to research that, because that's quite a complicated point actually. But
I mean, you can look back to the early issues of the vegan, and they talk about cruelty quite often, but we know what they mean because it's always backed up with something else. Whereas that's what doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I get the point, but I also get Ronnie's point, the fact that our language is not wasn't radically different back then. I just think it's to do with the preponderance of it.
Well, one of the things I meant to ask him, just going back, so when Animal Aid were kind of formed, and obviously the ALF were going at the same time, what was their kind of opinion of what you're doing? Because I mean, these days the kind of more welfare groups aren't very supportive of direct action.
No, well, I remember. Obviously, it was Jean Pink who was the founder of Animal Aid, a woman called Jean Pink, and how Animal Aid kind of started and built up their membership. They had these big leafleting sessions at the railway stations. I think mostly in London, at the big big rail terminals in London, and at first their campaign at first was focused on factory farming and animal experimentation. Those were the issues that they would give out leaflets about. And then they sort of built up a membership, and then, eventually got offices and so on. But the woman who started it off, Jean Pink, I remember being on a panel with her where they had people from various, animal protection and animal liberation organisations. And she kind of, I remember having a row with her because she criticised the ALF. But really the damage, it was the damage aspect that she didn't like. And there was this thing, you're bringing the movement into disrepute. And it was that kind of language she was using.
She was very straight-laced, wasn't she? And so yes. I remember we went to an anti-vivisection demo outside some kind of prestigious college. And there was those, the kind of tower kind of, props, kind of thing outside, the kind of archways and all that kind of stuff. And we wrote murderers wanted, apply within and that. And she came and wiped it off. told us off, like like a matron,
Yeah, like a school mom. Yeah, she was a bit like that, and of course I kind of had a, she said what she said, and then I criticised what she said, and so.
Well, I think it's fair to answer Andy's question directly. I think it's fair to say that Animal Aid were probably one of the first national groups to have a go at the LF, I would think.
Right.
But publicly and
it's the same story these days, isn't it? Because it's kind of like a direct opposition to what they want to do. They want to make deals and compromises and kind of like liaise with these groups to make change. They don't want to force anything, and so kind of you're getting in the way of that as far as they're concerned.
I think some of it was to do with the government. That they wanted the government to bring in laws, and so they wanted to kind of appear kind of very legitimate.
Yeah, there was a big build-up, wasn't there, to the update of the Cruelty to Animals Act. So they'd be working towards that, and all the putting animals into politics and GCAP and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Even then, they must have understood that the only way that anything will actually change is if we get animals' rights to be recognised first. For as long as we're talking about improving a welfare act, they're always going to be used. They're always going to be seen as objects.
This is the prop of new welfareism, though, Andy. The fact that they do think that everybody doing their own thing, all of it is good, even if some parts of it is rubbish and it's not going to work. It's all still good because it's for the animals and everything. And so this is kind of like new welfareism, really, that, we all chip in and do what we can. And then the political system, some people are very naive about it. And it's as simple as that, really.
Mm. Well, if you look at kind of
sorry to cut across you, Ronnie, but people were actually celebrating Labour getting in for the animals.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, when Tony Blair was elected way back, whenever he was elected, Labour produced this glossy document about all the things they were going to do for animal protection, didn't they? And that kind of, won a lot of.
The welfare in the title, didn't it, Ronnie?
Yeah. And they reneged on a large part of that. I mean, this is one of the reasons, like Barry Horn, who died, following a series of hunger strikes, where he was, demanding that the government bring in a royal commission to investigate.
Yeah, I talked about that in my PhD. Yeah. I thought it was a tragedy that an animal rights advocate ended up on a hunger strike because Labour had broken its animal welfare promises.
Well, it was only a promise to hold a royal commission. Doesn't necessarily mean that anything would have changed as a result of the royal commission.
Well, a royal commission usually means nothing changes, doesn't it?
Well, it's usually a way. It's often a way of kind of.
It pushes the peanut down the road, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a way of dealing with people's outrage and kind of making out that something's going to be done.
If you think in terms of 5-year terms in government, if you can push something down the road for 5 years, it's no longer your problem, is it?
Well, you see, I think this is the problem in terms of any promises that they make with regard to animal protection. I mean, and things there's been high hopes that the present sort of new Labour government, new Labour probably more ways than one, are gonna strengthen the Hunting Act. You see, but the problem is how much priority will be given to that. In all the things that they...
Even if they did, you still got the cops angle to it then, haven't you?
Well, it's not just having a strong law. It's that law has to be enforced.
That's what I mean, yeah.
And you see, if the law was strengthened to the extent that the hunts would have to disband and that they'd have to dismantle their infrastructure, in other words, that they would no longer have their stables and no longer have their kennels, right? Then it would be very hard for them to do that type of hunting illegally because their infrastructure would have been gone. You see, so that would be a way of kind of, making it so there'd be less need for enforcement because they wouldn't have the.
Yeah, can you imagine the outcry with all that? The link between hunting and horse racing, pony meets and point to point and all the rest of it, rural economy. That's why some of the Sabs, they went on the famous Countryside Alliance March, didn't they? Because they went to save their local post office and not for the hunting part of it.
Oh yes, but really, it was to do with hunting and all these things. That they were talking about all these other sort of rural issues.
Well, Dave Wetton went on the Countryside Alliance March.
Well, yes, but I think I think that was a con. I think people were conned that they weren't really in the Countryside Alliance isn't interested in those things. They're interested in preserving hunting, or they were, and I think all these other issues were brought in to make them to make them look better.
Yeah, make it a rural urban issue.
Yeah. So I'm kind of really shocked that Hunt Sabs went on that march. Didn't realise that was a kind of facade. That all these other issues were a facade, and that really it was a.
Yeah, but I mean, it was also the fact that don't forget this is where they changed their name. It became the Countryside Alliance instead of the British Field Sports Society in order to widen the remit of it. So it was a facade, but it was also fairly cleverly done in a way.
Oh yes, I think so. Yes, because they wanted to get broader support. But I mean, make no mistake, it really was all about.
Yeah, no, that. But if you've got a hunting thing, but you call it in defence of the countryside, then obviously you can just tell from claims making that's a much better thing to say.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. But you see, that's the problem. It's a question of priorities. That it's okay them saying, "Oh yes, we're going to do this and we're going to do that" in terms of protecting other animals. But how far down the list is that going to be of things they intend to do? It's not going to be anywhere near the top, is it? And are they ever going to come to it? Are they ever going to get there?
And we've even seen evidence this very day that Starmer has taken gifts which include trips to racing. So, horse racing.
Absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes. But surely until there's some sort of mindset shift, no legislation will change anything. It will only ever focus on welfare because it exists.
Well, the biggest gap in terms of other animals being spared from slaughter and obviously in many cases being spared from suffering as well. Those gains have really been achieved through direct action and education. They've not been achieved through legislation. Right. I mean, what we've ever achieved through legislation, certainly here in the UK, is kind of tiny.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's really limited too. Other than real vivisection, I suppose, is the one thing that you could potentially eradicate through government. But I think every other aspect of use, a lot of it, their hands are tied anyway. Because even if you could somehow bring in laws without a mindset change, without a shift in mentality.
But I'll tell you what, in my experience, Andy, a direct answer to that question is there are a lot of animal advocates who actually secretly or not believe that we'll never have a vegan world. And so then they say to themselves, so what do we do now?
Yeah, you see, I think, don't...
Sure. I mean, I understand why they'd be that pessimistic, but surely you're making it impossible to have a vegan world by settling for that now. The only way this will ever change is to be challenged. If you're going to just work within the framework that already exists, that says, right,
again, we're back to new welfarism. One of the arguments of new welfarism is, you vegans, you purists, you extremists, you abolitionists, you want all or nothing. Yeah. And if you ask for all, you'll get nothing.
But you see, the thing is,
we're not going to do that.
It actually isn't all or nothing. In fact, vegan outreach, vegan education, it couldn't be further from being all or nothing, because obviously the kind of, the kind of, what we want is to be able to educate sufficient number of people to become vegans so that we can get cultural change and coming from that, we can get political change. I
think there's an element of social psychology too, isn't there, both of you, in the sense that, people like Gene Pink or anybody, there's going to be some people who are going to feel comfortable enough about writing to your MP, having meeting with your local constituency and this kind of stuff, but they're not going to be comfortable doing the leafleting or door dropping and all that. So often it's to do with what you're prepared to do. And when you've got that situation, the answer to that from the movement point of view is everybody should do what they're prepared to do, even if that means a lot of people are not doing what would be the best.
Yes. I mean, but I think there's so many ways of promoting veganism that there really is something for everyone, even writing a letter to your local newspaper. I mean, I've written a letter, I'll know tomorrow whether it's going to be printed, to do with angling and fishing, because there was an article in there last week about a crackdown on illegal fishing. There's a crackdown on illegal fishing in the area, and of course, I wrote say, well, whether it's illegal or legal, it's still not ethical.
Did you open your inkwell and dip your nib in and write it?
Dip my nib in the inkwell. Yes, that's right. My quill. Well, I can't use quill, can I? But
your vegan quill.
But my vegan quill. Yes, you see. So there's like everyone. All vegans really can contribute to vegan education, and I think the thing is that even if we say we weren't to succeed in achieving the cultural change, for everyone who's educated to become vegan, that ends the demand. Certainly here in the UK, that ends the demand for almost 100 animals to be killed.
Yeah, but I think you've basically got that situation now. I mean, things like Camp Beagle aside, most activists now are doing something towards vegan education. When you talk about Gene Pink and all that, vegan education didn't exist then. So
I mean, vegan outreach is probably only been going 25, 30 years.
Yeah, it's one of the shocking things that people you think how what's going on kind of thing. But it is true that all these vegans weren't doing vegan outreach.
Oh no, they weren't, and I think historically the reason for that was because when the movement became, you might call, radicalized in the 1970s, and you got more grassroots activism, and there was the rise of direct action and all that kind of thing. We basically carried on doing what the existing societies did, campaigning against the same things, only in a more militant way.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happened with regard to welfare. You've got people who now are seen as militant vegans, but they're doing animal welfare and the framing everything in animal welfare. Because just like you're saying there, people fit into what's already there.
Yes. And
there must be like an assumption that, well, these people know what they're doing, so therefore this must be it. This is the movement. This is it. I got to fit in, right?
People replicate what they see, right, when they first come in. So a lot of the times you'll find that people that go
but that's the rules of society too, isn't it? That's generational.
Yeah. But I have noticed this though across the board. Like a lot of people that potentially had that kind of last jigsaw piece given to them on the street quite often go and do street activism. Or if they watched a film, you'll find that that's where they struggle, because it means that they've got their information from the internet, and that could be anything. Because after that film is finished, they could click a link from the comment section, or they'll type another thing into the search bar. That's when you find that, like, all this other stuff. And sadly, that's the vast majority of how people do go vegan these days. They watch something. They don't have a conversation. So that kind of like witnessing activism in the flesh doesn't actually happen for a lot of people. So they don't actually even have that. They just find the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, but
Normally, that is one
if
of
they had
our
a talk
welfare
in the
groups.
if they had a talk in the flesh, they'd still be being told welfare, wouldn't they?
Well, they would by a lot of people, not necessarily by everyone, but at least sometimes they would be more encouraged to go and do other things too, because they'd already see how easy it was. Like the amount of times that I speak to people and tell them about things like leafleting, and they're like, "Never thought about that." Yeah, because you've never seen anyone do it. If you'd have gone vegan because of a leaflet, you'd have realised just how easy and important that was. But it's because you've not seen it in action. And so, like, I think that's really important sometimes, that people do need to kind of see some other forms of activism in action. They need to see it to actually realise that they could do that
Yeah,
too.
I remember that back in the Liberator, the BUAV, British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection magazine. You had Paddy Broughton, who was one of the prime movers, saying, I went vegan or I became involved because of a leaflet. So, people were getting that kind of, that's what did it for me.
Yeah, it does.
There wasn't really any films to watch in those days.
Yeah, I've noticed that, you always ask the question, what made you go vegan or whatever, and you do kind of like pick up kind of across the board. It does seem to be the people that do this particular type of activism quite often went vegan because of this particular type of activism.
But it's hard to replicate, isn't it? It's hard to replicate. If someone went vegan because of a leaflets, then it's easy for the person who became vegan to then replicate that. To get some leaflets to do it. If someone went vegan because they saw a video on YouTube, how
exactly? They can't go into the farm and replicate. Yeah. Say they went vegan, for example. They watched Joey's Pignorant, right? They can't do what he did. So how do they replicate that? They basically just search on the internet, and what's going to come up most likely?
The way they do it is get more people to watch Pignorant.
Mm. But you're not providing that education part, then, are you? And you're not actually doing anything that's changed. Everyone, we're just kind of, it's almost like the carousel at the airport. The suitcase just goes round and round and round in a circle until someone pulls you off. Like that's the problem with it, and they don't realise. Because just sharing the video without making that connection and actually doing something is kind of like you're just perpetuating that problem. You haven't even educated yourself. So yeah, I definitely think that's where we're at a lot of the time now. A lot of these people have no idea that the new welfare is.
Well, if you think the film itself is an ethical statement, then that does it. I mean, people have described Earthlings as an animal rights.
No, film. I don't think the film is an ethical statement, to be perfectly honest, because it's not. I mean, it talks about the various uses, but it's from a welfare point of view, and the footage that you're watching obviously takes your head to welfare. It doesn't make you think about rights violations.
No, but I mean, therefore, watch Pignorant and go vegan, because that's what Pignorant will tell you to do.
Potentially. But then what? What's activism? Share Pignorant.
Yeah. Which is why, whenever there's a live, I mean, the most things that people say, go watch this film, go watch that speech, go and watch this film, watch this documentary and all that, because that's how they did it. And they just want more people to do what they did. Mm-hmm. And, everybody's going to kind of connect the dots. I mean, but that is activism for a lot of people. Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to change too much. You could just change what it is that they're sending people, I suppose. I mean, if people are quite comfortable doing that, it seems much more difficult to try and get them to do something completely different than it would be to just say, hey, have you tried this film instead? Something that does make more of an ethical connection. Because obviously, there's all the graphic footage and stuff there, but it's not talking about the fundamental wrong, is it? It's not spelling it out. You have to get that from somewhere else, and that's few and far between for the most part. Most of the things you'll find are going to be welfare-based. So there's not many people that are challenging that idea.
I think the problem might be a little bit is if you think back to our day, Ronnie, is the fact that you would find out a bit of stuff and then you'd end up reading a book, and you'd spend time reading a book, and you'd do more like a deep dive into issues that way, and you'd also be reading the magazines of the groups that you think. So I think it is kind of a slower way of kind of learning, maybe. by reading.
And obviously society's attention span in general is pretty shite, isn't it? I mean, even when we're talking about the vegan audience, when I go back and look at the stats on just my TikTok videos that are like 3 minutes long and the average watch time is like a minute, and it's like, so if you can't give me 3 minutes, you're never going to read a book because you just don't have the interest to do it. There just isn't that drive anymore. Whereas, I mean, as you say, people used to once upon a time hear about something and want to learn more about it. People now kind of already think they know everything about it as soon as they hear the name of something, or they watch a video and they're experts. People don't have that attention or desire to do any of those things anymore. I mean, and a huge part of that, I suppose, is to do with technology. But even when it comes to like ebooks, people don't want to read and things like that. Don't even want to listen to the narrated versions of these books. It's time they don't want to invest. I don't know how to fix that part. Yeah, you never make a video over 1 minute. Exactly, yeah. Because people's attention spans can't last 60 seconds. How the hell are they going to read a book? How on earth are people going to read The Case for Animal Rights if they can't have a 60-second attention span? Well, not just read it, absorb it.
It might be difficult. You're still there, Ronnie.
It's near impossible. Imagine trying to take The Case in 60-second chunks. It'd be the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's going to become vegan, they obviously have got to spend more than a minute on it. I think something lasting a minute could, be what causes them to look more into it. I mean, when we do sort of video ads on social media locally, we keep those to a minute, a minute or less. But within them, there's a link where they can go to a website that will tell them more about veganism. So you're kind of hoping that people will click on that link and do that. It's just to kind of, you just capture their attention and give them some information in that minute that would encourage them to want to know more.
Yeah. Do they do all right, those ads?
Well, you get the stats. You get the stats back from it's Facebook and Instagram, basically.
Yeah.
And they're you get the stats for how many people have clicked on the link, and it kind of works out that you have to pay for the ads, but it's kind of probably the average amount that you have to pay per link click is probably something like 20p, which is pretty good, really. If you say to someone,
it's not too bad, to be fair.
Yeah, it's quite a good, it's quite a kind of good return. And the reason we started doing it was because of lockdown. Couldn't get out on the street to do it.
Yeah.
And we still do. We don't do the video ads as much now. Just occasionally, but we still do them because they're still, it does seem to be quite a good return for. Interesting enough, the one that got the most link clicks featured fishes. Was about fishes.
Oh, that's interesting. You would think that would potentially be the least.
No, it was a story about a friendship between two fishes, and one waited for the other one while the other one was caught in a net, and a diver freed the.
I've seen that. Yeah.
I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that.
And then it went on to say about how they're sentient, and about obviously they shouldn't be exploited and shouldn't be eaten, and become vegan. And that got more link clicks than any other video. The one about
it's interesting that Jennifer makes a good point, which is the problem is I feel most of the new activists will read Earthling Ed's book rather than Tom Regan. Now the issue there is that if Earthling Ed's book was an updated version of Tom Regan, then we'd be flying, right? It's just that it's not, and so because Earthling Ed came into a welfare movement. He reflects welfarism. He's also part of the reduction of the meaning of veganism. So nobody's going to go back to Tom Regan for all the reasons that we know. It's too dense.
I suppose what makes it even sadder than that is it's not even a competitive element because those people don't know that Tom Regan existed. It's not like there's two books on the shelf and they're picking heads. Tom's not there. It's not on the shelf. No one knows about him. So, that's an issue within itself. It'd be bad enough
it is, right.
if you know everywhere that sold Ed's book sold his. It'd be bad enough if our challenge was getting people to buy the other book. They don't list the other book.
I did a talk at VegFest once. I think it must have been about 2017, 18, and I was asking people, have you read Tom Reagan? Have you read Joan Denea? And have you read Peter Singer? And for the majority, they'd never really heard of all three of them.
Right.
But now you've had this update of animal liberation.
Yeah, quite a lot. If ever I ask if anyone's ever read a book and they go, oh yeah, it was a book that made me go vegan, for example, it's always animal liberation every time.
Just saying, wait, what? Ed went welfare. Well, Ed is welfare. It's not went welfare.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it does come back to what Roger said, though. These people are coming into a movement that's already kind of established welfare roots. So it's not like they're saying, hey, this is a bit extreme for me, I'm going to do this. I mean, in Ed's case, there is some of that. But it's actually like, this is the movement they're coming into.
Yeah, I think one problem is, and, you know, I think Jess is reflecting that in the response here, is the fact that we've got a welfare movement or a new welfare movement, but it's called an animal rights movement. And so, therefore, the people like the label animal rights, but they don't like the theory of animal rights. And so they tend to go for Singer. I mean, Ed is a big Singer fan.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, and so that means that you talk about utilitarianism, you're not talking about rights. But, you know, those distinctions have gone. Francione is not making these kind of claims anymore. He's kind of, you know, blotted his copybook and all that. And
a lot of people don't know Francione either, to be honest.
No, but I mean, even if they do, they just see
yeah. I mean, there's a very
divisive and stuff. So
hold them in high regard.
Yeah, and so, but the point is, if you're brought into a welfare movement, even though it might not be called that, then you're going to do that thing. You get socialized by it. And so Ed comes into a new welfare movement, and then he starts talking welfare. So the overwhelming language is cruelty and abuse. Welfare language, the same language as the RSPCA, and the cycle continues.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not sure what the proper terminology is in modern day for this, but it's kind of got that element of Chinese whispers too, right? So every time that this message is repeated, it's just ever so slightly different variant that's probably weaker and weaker and weaker, and that's just what happens. So what the movement that Ed joined 10 years ago is probably at a weaker footing now than it was then. So he's part of that too. So yeah, like this is. You can't necessarily blame these people because it's what's all around.
No. I mean, these people are not to blame, at least not initially, because they just know what the movement they joined told them.
Yeah.
See, what's happening is I mean, back in the day, say for instance, if you look at the anti-vivisection movements, that was, you know, like prior to the 1970s, you had the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection and the National Anti-Vivisection Society, you know, their language was very much about cruelty, the cruelty of animal experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
And then that carried on when the anti-vivisection movement became more militant, perhaps became radicalized. Then we carried on using the same words. We carried on talking about cruelty, and then, you know, what happened. You know, the rise of vegan outreach 25 to 30 years ago, where we're campaigning against the kind of use of other animals for foods, became much more prominent. And the emphasis on animal experimentation kind of faded away, didn't it, for a long time? It's only kind of started to re-emerge, you know, in recent years now. But what happened was that the reason for opposing, you know, the animal farming industry and the fishing industry, became based on cruelty. It was like, you know, these industries are wrong. You know, we need to campaign against these industries, not support these industry, because of the cruelty involved in those industries. So it was the same, really, as when we were campaigning against animal experimentation. The reason given for, these industries being wrong was because of the cruelty involved. You see, that's kind of what happened. It was all about cruelty, and that's kind of how it continued, really.
We need to do some. I mean, I ought to do this myself as a sociologist. We ought to do some content analysis. I've just opened up the Town Conspiracy, got a random copy of the Liberator open, right? And I haven't seen the word cruelty yet. I mean, the front page is injustice, right? It's about RCS, and then you open the page and you just don't see the word cruelty. You go to the next page. There's no. It'd just be full of cruelty nowadays. You literally don't see the word. I've just looked at about 7 pages, and I haven't seen. I'm looking at the headlines, but I don't see the word cruelty. And I'm quite happy to believe that I'm looking at the olden days with rose tinted glasses, and I've warned myself about that, and I've mentioned it, but I'm still looking through this thing, and I literally haven't seen one mention of cruelty yet.
That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
I mean, we did that as well. Remember I sent all those things from the badges and stuff. There's no cruelty badges and stuff. It's all rats have rights and animals have rights and all this kind of stuff. Remember I sent them a few weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
I found it. This is first one I found, page 19. Fight cruelty to animals, Youth for Animal Rights. And it's a London address, so I don't know what that group is. But that's the first time I've seen it. So it wasn't the Liberator who wrote that. They took an advert which is called Fight Cruelty to Animals. And then the group is Youth for Animal Rights. So there you go. The confusion.
Yeah. But no, that is interesting. It would be good to see where it really starts to kind of become merged again. Because obviously at the kind of height of Reagan and Francione eras, but there was a real kind of push for animal rights, and that was actually the message for a short period of time before it kind of switched back again.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the kind of the debate that you enhanced, and if you think about the torch of reason, is cruelty mentioned there?
Hang on. It's not mentioned by Reagan in the debate.
No, that's what I mean. Yeah, by Reagan.
I can't think off the top of my head that it is mentioned in the Sword of Justice.
I think Ryder would have mentioned it because he always talked about speciesism being about kind of being opposed to pain.
I think Richard Ryder and Andrew Lindsay both mention it, but Reagan doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure because it's only recently that I captioned the Sword of Justice. I don't think he mentions cruelty in that entire speech, no, because he's making constant comparisons to human rights violations, so it wouldn't make sense that he talk about cruelty. Which is really interesting to me because I think that really hits home that when people think about human rights violations, oppression, exploitation, these are the things that come to mind. And when they think about animal rights violations, they automatically think about cruelty and abuse. And that's a distinction that we need to work hard to change because there is no difference.
Well, this is page 16, right? And the headline is New RSPCA Leaflets. But there's no mention of cruelty in this. The RSPCA produced 2 new leaflets on the subject of lead poisoning in swans and tail docking of dogs. The first leaflet describes the suffering caused to swans as a result of lead poisoning caused by lead weights discarded by anglers. The birds die slowly as a result of paralysis in the neck muscles, blah, blah, blah. But even in this little article about the RSPCA, it hasn't got cruelty in the article.
No, to be fair, I mean, a little bit of credit to the RSPCA. When I was doing the research before, between like the 50s and 60s, if you look at some of their posters and stuff, their messaging's way stronger than it is now. Much stronger. They actually seem against things as opposed to just, oh, that's a bit sad. Which is pretty much their stance now.
Folks, I'm gonna have to go.
No, I was gonna say. To be fair, did you have some final words? As we've gone like 45 minutes.
Yeah,
over.
you've got some final words about Nam, haven't you?
Oh, well done. Thank you for reminding me. Yes. So if you are in the UK and able to attend the 17th of August in London, we start a Marble Arch from midday. It would be great to see everyone there for the National Animal Rights March this year. Both Roger and myself are speaking. But yeah, hopefully the weather's great and we can see as many people there as possible. I don't know if anyone will do like a live stream kind of thing, a bit like we did last year. I'm not sure about that. Because obviously we will both be there, so we won't be doing it.
Oh, yeah.
It's up to you, Ronnie. Oh, no, you'll be there as well.
I'll be there. Whether I'm sure someone will do a live stream.
I'm sure someone will. Yeah. So some of the people from outside the UK, or even some of the people in the UK that can't make it, can still watch. All the speeches will be recorded at the very least. But yeah, on that note, thanks so much again, guys. Really enjoyed it, and we'll be back same time next week, I guess.
Yeah. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye bye then.
See you later.